a $1 million taxpayer grant for, and here's a direct quote, gender inclusive open source through gender inclusive tools, end quote, has just been canceled. This got canceled about 8 or 10 days ago. And I've been following a bunch of these grants that have been coming through the National Science Foundation and other federal outlets that are all taxpayer funded, federal income tax funded grants that have been going towards DEI programs in open source and computer education. What's been amazing as I've been going through these, as I've been just combing through the absolute mountain, the tidal wave of canceled grants that have happened over the last, month to month and a half, what I've noticed is almost none of them have anything practical that they do. They are all grants about things like this, like, oh, we need to promote, gender and racial equity among C programmers in a small town in rural Arizona. Like why are we spending taxpayer money on this? It's over and over again, things like that. And another thing I've been noticing a heavy trend on is a lot of these funds are going to the state of Oregon. The state of Oregon, particularly Oregon State University, Portland State, and others, are getting were getting a huge amount of money to do DEI-focused research around grants, specifically around computing, just huge amounts of money. This one was for $1,006,773 for open source through gender inclusive tools. And specifically, this research will investigate whether and how open source software, tools, and technologies have gender biases tied with diverse problem-solving styles. They go on to talk about finding gender bias bugs in software, about how there's different genders have different information processing styles, and open source software has to account for that, and then, create those best practices for fixing those gender bias bugs. And this seems nonsensical, right? What's really crazy to me about this isn't so much that there's someone out there thinking, you know what, maybe there's gender bias bugs. Let's put money to that. You know what? A fool and his money is easily parted. Go for it. I don't love that my taxpayer money was going towards it, but if some philanthropist and company wants to fund this research, go nuts. What really caught my eye, though, is that this is not the first or only such ridiculously exorbitant grant going towards absolutely ludicrous DEI-focused research projects around open source. And if you start to tally them all up, you're talking millions and millions of dollars that were going towards these DEI projects in open source. How does that compare to the actual funding of the projects doing the work? And if you really look into it, it's obscene, because this one grant of over $1 million is more than the combined yearly income of both GNOME and KDE times 2. How obscene is that? So the project's actually doing work, regardless of what you or I think of politics or quality of either KDE or GNOME. They actually are doing work, right? They're actually producing software, desktop software, and all sorts of little tools and libraries and whatnot. And they get literally a quarter-ish of this one grant to produce gender inclusive open source software. And it's not even to produce gender inclusive open source software, it's to create best practices to fix gender bias bugs. Is that really a problem? Like, is that really the biggest problem we have in open source? Because if you look at the funding, it sure looks as heck like that must be the biggest problem in open source because of how much money was going towards it. And so I think it's worth pointing that out for a couple of reasons. First, why is any of these taxpayer funding going towards these gender diversity studies and racial equity studies relating to open source, but not towards the open source projects and developers themselves. Right? I mean, it's kind of obscene. So is this just simply an example of the people at KDE, GNOME, and all these other open source foundations just simply doing a terrible job of going out there and getting the money, whereas the people who just want to promote DEI and don't actually accomplish anything in the world, they're really great at getting the federal money? I mean, maybe that's a big part of it. And maybe a big part of it was the people running the National Science Foundation just really loved funding things that were ultimately pointless, but a bit sexist and racist along the way. I mean, maybe that was also the point, because I've been looking into it, and it's not like there is a whole bunch of crazy big grants going to KDE or GNOME or OpenBSD or FreeBSD and whatnot that are sitting out there. There aren't any that are getting canceled or not getting canceled. They just don't exist. These big grants don't exist in terms of really creating, server farms or developing new pieces of software focused on security or any of these sorts of things. It's all DEI centric stuff. It's really, really ridiculous and obscene. So it's worth pointing out that this is ongoing, and we see within the open source world some crazy DEI stuff happening, right? The culture has become almost more DEI than open source. Like the whole point of many open source projects and foundations, including some of the ones that you see on the screen in front of you, is less about the software now and more about promoting DEI and woke activism. And one has to wonder how much of that is fueled by the amount of federal taxpayer dollars that was flooding into these projects specifically to promote DEI activism. I mean, it's worth noting, and worth noting that this is happening. Now, the good news about all of this is that many of these grants are getting canceled in bulk. I've been posting these on X every couple of days now as I find them. I've been trolling through all of the different canceled grants from the NSF and the education department and whatnot. And some of them are just truly insane. I mean, we've covered a few of them so far if you've been following along. I mean, there's been ones where they're going to, they're going to pay $700,000 or something like that to create a textbook to teach basic computer science programming to people who were Latino, because not because of language issues, but because of cultural issues. A Latino person, according to this grant, couldn't possibly learn the C programming language, C, unless they had like good cultural references in it. Just the weirdest thing. I don't remember any cultural references from any of the books I used to learn C or assembly or any other programming language. I just don't remember cultural references occurring at all. There was like the language and like the math and like a description of how it worked and then sample code. Like this was pretty straightforward. I digress. So this one is canceled. That is fantastic. Oh, and the other thing that I think should be on people's radar. A lot of these are going through Oregon and Oregon State University. Remember the story about how the open source labs at the Oregon State University was facing a funding crisis just a couple of weeks back? Well, they've resolved that funding crisis. A couple of companies and donors came in and have funded them through the end of the year. So that's temporarily resolved. However, the funding crisis itself came about at the exact same moment that all of these DEI grants were canceled. So what happened was all these DEI grants going towards computer science at the Oregon State University, specifically to focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion in computer science. As soon as those funds went away, the Oregon State University turned around and said, "Okay, open source labs, you're gone." Which tells me, this is my personal understanding of the situation, that the Oregon State University was utilizing the existence of the open source labs to get federal funding for DEI programs, right? They were using it as a a way of saying, oh, look how involved we are in open source, and look how much we give back to open source, and we have a pedigree in open source, and you should give us DEI grants. And they got them by the millions of dollars. And as soon as that funding dried up, Oregon State University was like, yoink, forget this. We're not going to fund this open source lab anymore. I think that's rather fascinating and curious, and it's worth keeping an eye on that because it's a little bit weird. Thank you to the Lunduke Journal subscribers. Go to lunduke.com and click on all the links. I love links. Links are great. They are universal, and they are resources, and they are locators, and they're all up at lunduke.com. Lots of different ways you can watch, blah, 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 blah. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, nerds and nerdettes across the inner tubes, I do declare end broadcast.